In a world where anything is possible, in a world where the normal and the paranormal reside, Almost Unbelievable brings to you the stories you want to hear, but fear to hear. Join us in the pit.
You have joined the Almost Unbelievable podcast with Katz and Ranty. I'm Katz. Are you there, Ranty?
I am Katz, and thank you for bringing me along on this very interesting show. I do believe we have a guest that some of the audience may be familiar with.
Yeah, our guest today is a little bit of a YouTube celebrity, but we'll talk about his channel in a minute. For now, you know how much I love to bore you with my stories and trivia, so are you ready?
I've always got time for a story from you, Katz.
So if I was to ask you about Anita, what or who do you think Anita is?
Why is that name so familiar? I have no idea. I did a painting job for an Anita a couple of years ago. Maybe. Is that the one you're talking about?
No, it would be a hell of a coincidence if I was, wouldn't it? No, Anita is an acronym. It stands for the Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna. Now, dear old Anita has been in the news recently with sensational headlines like, has NASA actually found a parallel universe where time runs backwards? And I'm not going to go deeply into the science behind this at the minute because I really want to do a full podcast on Anita and what it was supposed to have found. But it is curious that we do seem to be getting quite a lot of stories lately from people who feel as if they've been pulled from one universe or one sort of dimension into another. And this is where maybe science meets science fiction or science meets the supernatural. So, Ranty, would it be possible in the future to do a whole podcast just on Anita and how it may have provided evidence for an alternate parallel universe?
Oh, right, okay. Well, yeah, by all means, bring me in on this one. It sounds very intriguing.
Awesome. Well, for now, today's guest has got a story of his own. And as you might have guessed from the introduction, it has got to do with perhaps slipping into some sort of parallel world. But I'm really excited about today's guest. He is an ultra scientifically minded skeptic who runs the very successful YouTube channel, FTFE. Please look him out and you'll see him debunking all sorts of claims on that channel. But he's here now with a claim of his own. And Ranty, I will let you introduce him.
Thanks, Katz. And yes, we are joined by FTFE. How in the world are you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me on. I'm really happy to be here. Can I just say that I think you and Ranty might be one of the best duos on the internet, so please don't stop doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
When I was younger, I was 14 and I had a few paper rounds. One of them was at 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was just coming, it was probably midsummer, just before school was go for summer, and they just released Mortal Kombat 3. And I stayed up pretty much all night playing Mortal Kombat 3. Fight me as Sub-Zero, you'll lose, trust me. Had about maybe half an hour's kit, my alarm goes off, I've got to get up, do my paper round, tired as you like. Walk down to the shop, pick up my papers, doing my normal rounds. And I've been doing this round for about 2 years at this time. You know, it was almost an autopilot thing for me, right? And as I was about 3/4 through the round, I started noticing that the lights, the lampposts that I was going past, the lights would turn off as I got past them. Now, that wasn't necessarily an unusual thing. It was early in the morning. That was the time that the lights usually went off. And it happened every now and then. I didn't really think anything of it. But as I was about to go around this corner, I went past a light and it went off. And I felt pressure over my body. And like static electricity on every part of my body. And it made me feel really nauseous and slightly dizzy. And then when I looked up, I wasn't in the same place anymore. It was still the street that I was on, but everything looked almost like a pastel drawing. Nothing was quite right. It was, there wasn't really any buildings there, but there were shapes that maybe could be buildings. And I kind of blinked my eyes a few times, rubbed my eyes, thought maybe I just felt a bit weird, but no, it was still there. And then there was what appeared to be people or some kind of life forms, and they seemed agitated that I was there and were moving towards me. And I freaked out and I turned around and I ran. And then after about 5 seconds, I had that feeling again, that pressure over my entire body, that feeling of static touching every single part of my body. And I felt dizzy and weird. And when I looked up again, I was back at the same, in the normal street, doing with the buildings around me like normal. Turned around, none of that weirdness that I'd seen was there. And I just carried on doing my paper round. Felt very queasy and nauseated for the whole day, had a headache. I got home and I spoke to my mum, and I was saying to my mum that something weird has happened. And my mum said to me that, well, you're probably just tired. You probably were just sleepwalking or something. And that almost makes sense to me. But it was such a vivid experience, especially the seeing these life forms, these people. It was all kind of washed out and weird, but there was definitely people there, or some kind of life forms, and they seemed very, very irritated that I was near them, that I was there. And they were coming towards me like they were, angry at me. And the only thing that you can do in that situation, I think, is turn around and run. And that's what I did. And everything came back to normal again. And I don't know what happened. I'm a man of science. I think there is multiple universes. And for a second, I might have slipped into an alternate reality, because it was definitely a real place. It was definitely, I was there. I could see into the distance. It had shape. It had 3Dness to the world, and it didn't seem like a dream. It felt very, very real. Even after trying to rub my eyes and give myself a shake to see if I was hallucinating, it was still there. It was all very, very real. And I can remember the feeling of the pressure of my body and the electric, the static touching my hands and touching my cheeks, and that it's a feeling that I've never had in a dream or anything before. And it's such a vivid thing that I can still feel it now when I think about it, what that feeling was. So, yeah, I was very freaked out by the whole thing. I spent the whole day feeling very, very uneasy. I still carried on doing my paper round, and it never happened again. Lights going off, that's just something that happens at that time in the morning. But for just those few minutes, those maybe 30 seconds or something, I think I went somewhere else. And, I could never say for sure what definitely happened, but it's an experience that's so vivid in my mind that I think there has to be some kind of alternate explanation for it other than I was just sleepwalking.
Wow. Well, one of the things I like most about this story is that I know you, and I know how scientific you are. I know how skeptical you are. You built a YouTube channel with over 40,000 subscribers based on being scientific and skeptical, and yet here you are with a story that you are struggling to find a scientific explanation for, and I think that's fascinating. But before we start to delve into the good stuff, we do have something on this podcast we like to call the housekeeping questions, where we ask the questions that we know the listeners are going to be burning to ask, the obvious questions that they want getting out the way. So for that, Ranty, I'm going to pass over to you. Have you got any housekeeping questions?
Yeah, I think the first one's going to be, had you taken any drugs recently?
No. I was 14, and I was a very good, very, prim and proper, top of the class type boy. I didn't do anything like that at that age. Didn't smoke cigarettes or anything. So no, I think the only drug was the fact that I was low on sleep at that time. But
And speaking of sleep, have you ever experienced sleepwalking before or after?
yeah, I have sleptwalked a few times in my life. I remember going to camp with school, and I tried to sleepwalk out of the tent and out of the place that we were, and the teacher had to come and get me. And I also sleptwalked on the bus when we were coming back from France with the school, and then told my teacher that I needed to have a bath or something. So yeah, there has been instances in my life where I have sleptwalked. My mum caught me peeing in the cupboard once when I was younger. I remember that. So yeah.
I like to use sleepwalk as an excuse, and I'm peeing around the house as well.
Well, when you sleepwalk, is it a memory that you have of your sleepwalking, or is it when somebody else says to you, hey, you were sleepwalking and this is what you did?
Well, every time that I've sleptwalked, I've got no memory of it.
There you go.
Every time someone said to me, you've been sleepwalking, I don't remember anything that's happened.
I'm the same. I've sleptwalked in the past, and maybe one or two instances when I've woken up the next morning, I've maybe confused flashes of it with a dream, but most of the time, absolutely no recollection. But you seem to be very clear that you had these very distinct physical sensations there.
That's the thing that sells it for me in my mind, is that the physical sensations that I remember, that feeling of like squeezing over every point of my body, and the feeling of static that you can feel it if you rub the balloon on your head. You can almost feel that, but I had that on every point of my body, and it got intense and then faded away. and then I was somewhere else. And it's that very vivid physical sensation memory that keeps this so clear in my mind.
So the last housekeeping question for me: have you ever had a fully lucid dream?
So lucid dream is where you know you're dreaming, right?
You know you're dreaming. You are walking around as if the world is real, but you can also maybe manipulate your surroundings a lot of the time. But you can give yourself superpowers. You can do what you want. It's like you're being like Neo in your own little world.
Yeah, I have. I remember a dream I had when I was younger. Where in the dream, we were for some reason living at the top of a hill, and we had a baby with my family, even though we didn't have a baby, and we were pushing the pram down the hill. And I just thought, wait, this isn't right. Oh, it's a dream, and then I could fly. So. Yeah, I've definitely had a lucid dream where I realized I was in a dream. It didn't last very long. Quite soon after realizing that it was a dream, I woke up. But no, I definitely had that.
Okay, well, that's me out of housekeeping questions. Have you got any more, Ranty, before we delve into the good stuff?
Yeah, I kind of want you to just reaffirm what actually happened on that day. Do you remember waking up, going and getting your papers from the shop, then going doing the round, and then coming back and not sleeping? Nothing got in the way from start to finish, from what you recall.
Yeah, I do remember it, because I remember thinking when I got up, oh damn, I shouldn't have stayed up so late playing Mortal Kombat. I remember being like, oh, I don't want to do this today, and going to the shop and being really tired and can't wait till the day's over kind of thing. And, I remember picking up the papers and starting my round. And I remember walking past the certain lampposts that were going off and thinking, oh, that's happening again. So even though at that point, after doing the round for 2 years, there was an element of autopilot to the whole thing, I do remember that morning.
Okay. And these feelings that you had, have you ever had them before, this static electricity feeling?
No. Only like when you're playing with balloons and stuff, static electricity, and you can feel your hairs on your arm rising. Only ever like that, or putting your hand on a Van de Graaff generator or something, but never over my whole body or as intense as that, ever.
And the physical pressure you felt, was it like a pressure from above? Was it a pressure from all places, like you were being, squashed, like you were deep underwater? Or?
Yeah, it felt like going to the bottom of a pool, and you can feel that extra pressure on every point of your body.
Can I ask you one other question?
Yeah.
For that 30 seconds or so that you were in this, let's say, alternate reality, this pressure that you had, was it constant throughout the time that you were there as well?
No, it was only as I seemed to transition. The feeling of pressure and the static, it built up to a point and then went away. And that was when I kind of looked up. I was like, oh, what was that? Oh, shit, where am I? And then even though I felt definitely nauseated and slightly dizzy for the whole time, the feeling of the pressure wasn't there again until I turned around and kind of tried to run away. And then I felt that pressure and static building up again and then going away. And then I was back where I was.
So when you said you went into a different location, was it a case that it was the same location that just looked very weird and different? Or was it just literally a completely different location?
Well, there was definitely like a street with shapes around the edges, very much like you would recognize it as a street, but nothing looked quite right. The colors weren't right. It's almost hard to explain. It was like looking into a pastel crayon drawing or something, But it was still a very physical 3D world, even though it felt flat in itself.
Yeah, it's interesting that you've said this. We had a guest on last week. We still haven't put the podcast out, actually, from a gentleman that believes that he's actually still living in a parallel world. And he explains some similarities with you. One of them being that this pressure, he feels like there's a different pressure. The colours are different as well, doesn't he? He feels like in his old reality, he feels that the colours were a bit brighter there, whereas here it's a bit duller. But he also talks about a difference in pressure. Now, I know obviously you're going through what you're going to describe as some kind of, let's say, doorway. And as you pass through the doorway, that's when you get this pressure. But once you're into that new reality, you didn't feel anything other than just this pastel-like drawing. Like, let's say, a Picasso drawing. So you're looking at a Picasso drawing, and then you came back, yeah? And that's not the only one. We had another one, Alternate Reality 2, and they felt a very similar thing. They felt this very eerie thing. They knew something was up. It's like you've got this, your heckles on your neck are standing up because you're thinking to yourself, the lights have gone off. This is a bit eerie. I know it's my normal round and I know it's happened before, but something's different, and you felt it. And it's the same with this woman. She felt it too when she had this alternate reality thing. There's a lot of similarities that I'm finding in this, Cass. What do you think?
Yeah, now, you are right. Every single story of this type we've had certainly share similar characteristics, which is interesting. And I have got a feeling I know almost what I'm going to say at the end of this podcast about this. You know, I'm sure we'll disagree, but yeah, they do seem to have very, very common characteristics, which I would expect if there was a cause for this type of feeling, for this type of experience, and I would expect them to have things in common. Now, we might differ on what we think that cause is, but I'm quite relieved, if you like, that there's a common thread through them all. I do have a question about the people, though. You said they were very agitated. Yeah. So how could you tell they were? Did you just feel it? Did they have facial features that you could see were disturbed? Or
I couldn't say if they had any definitive features, and I could just kind of tell that they were agitated in the way that they were moving. It kind of seemed like they were turning towards me and away, and in a way it felt like they were having a conversation about me and then coming to confront me, but there's no kind of physical way of getting that across. It was just, when you walk into a room and you can tell people are talking about you, and it kind of felt like that. And then the fact that all of a sudden they all were moving towards me as though they wanted to confront me, to me it felt like they were irritated that I was there and they were trying to figure out what was going on.
What made you decide to walk back, though? I mean, what made you decide to think, hey up, I don't like it here, I need to backtrack and get the hell out of here?
I was scared. I think that's the only way to say I would. It was a fight or flight thing, and in my brain I was like, I need to go away from this, and I just turned and ran. And very quickly after turning and going to run again, that feeling came back, that pressure and that static, and then I was just where I was again.
So, I mean, there's a lot of TV programs out that I've been watching recently too about these time traveling things, and they talk about little pockets, little spaces that you could just transition through. Let's call it an entrance to a wormhole or something. So would you say that when you went into this little area and you felt the pressure, it was the same position when you retreated back out of it?
Yeah, I think because I'd gone through and kind of carried on walking for a bit and then kind of stopped and looked around and then turned around and ran. It was about the same position that I was at. I was definitely the same place before I went and when I came back. So I feel like there was a particular space in both of these places that allowed me to transition between them.
And it's interesting that you told your mum straight away. Yeah, I mean, you just came in, you told your mum, you've thought about it. I imagine you've thought about it quite a lot over the years.
Yeah, I have. And I talk to my mum about it every now and then. I say, do you remember when she's like, yeah, you were just sleepwalking. But, I was pretty shaken up by the whole thing. And when I got home, my mum could tell that I was like, something was wrong. And I was like, this has just happened. I'm, almost crying, trying to explain. And my mum was like, look, you've just been sleepwalking. You've just had a dream. Don't worry about it. But it just doesn't fit any of the other parameters of the times that I've been sleepwalking before.
Yeah, just didn't feel like sleepwalking whatsoever. No. Felt completely different and realistic. Yeah, no, I get that. Have you ever met anybody else in the real world that's had a similar experience that you can bounce off any sort of common factors?
No, I've never really spoke to anyone about this because I've always felt a bit silly about it. But I've also never spoken to anyone that says that they've had an experience similar. I mean, I've looked up online, well, maybe other people have had a similar experience. And I remember reading a story about a guy going to McDonald's, and when he got to McDonald's, his dog got scared and it wasn't quite the same. And I think, like you were saying about the guy that thinks he's an alternate reality now, I've read a story about a guy doing that, but I've never met anyone in real life that has a similar experience to me.
But it does happen. I mean, we've been at this now, Ranty, how long? About
only a
2
couple
months,
of months,
Yeah, and we've already you're the third person already who's come and given us a story like this, all with similar traits and in fact, so, it is something that does happen. The question is, what is the reason for it? I'm wondering if there's anything else I should ask you, if there's anything that maybe we've missed.
Yeah, the sickness. You said that you felt nausea and sickness after you came out of that. Well, in one of our more recent stories, we had a lady on called Alex, and her friend walked through an area where this woman just disappeared in front of her. This was when they were having this, experience. And she walked through this area and she got incredibly sick afterwards as well. She had to sit down. She had to lay by the side of the road. She felt so nauseated. Would you say that was how you felt?
Yeah, there was definitely a sense of dizziness and like overwhelming kind of, I just feel like drained completely. I didn't sit down or anything, but I remember leaning on the wall and just taking a few seconds to kind of compose myself. And you know that feeling when you're about to be sick and you think, well, if I just take a minute, have a few breaths, it can go away. That's what I felt like that moment just before you're gonna throw up. That feeling of being completely drained and just having nothing in you. But although the feeling kind of stayed a little bit with me all day, I kind of shook off the initial feeling quite quickly. But I did spend like pretty much the rest of the day just feeling a bit uneasy.
And like you said, nothing like this you've ever experienced since?
No, never before or never since, which I think is one of the reasons it stays so vividly in my mind. I can think about it quite often. I think I've never experienced that before. The only other time I think about the pressure is when I was in the Royal Navy training to be a submariner. You do the submarine escape training tank where they put you at the bottom of a massive column of water and they pressurize the area that you're in to match the bottom of the water so the hatch can go up and you can practice escaping from the submarine. And I remember when I was doing that, afterwards, I kind of thought to myself, yeah, that pressure, I remember that feeling of having every single bit of my body feel an extra push on it. So that's the only other time that I've experienced that thing, but it was, natural. It was something that was supposed to happen, but never the electric feeling before.
And listen, this might sound like an odd question now, but when you sort of snapped out of it, if you're like, there weren't car alarms going off or anything like that, were there?
No, not that I remember. It just seemed like a normal day. It was quite warm, the sun was coming out quite quickly. I just carried on around. I only had about 5 or 6 more houses to do after that. It was just a normal day. Nothing weird happened apart from that.
Well, one thing I will say is that, this is probably the first time that you've talked about it, which is great for us because it's nice to have you on. But on the other side of the coin, you're not alone here. There are a lot of people that have had these experiences, and we're finding this. Well, I'm finding it for sure, definitely. I know Katz is too. But these people have got these similar things that they talk about, these similar events. I've had one too. My mum, I believe, went into this glitch, and I've spoken about it too. And at the same time, I saw this, let's say, a figure on the bus who didn't look like my mum. It was all just black. It was like a black figure. But I thought it was my mum. It was weird. It was like, I knew that was my mum, but it wasn't. It looked nothing like her, but I presumed it was my mum. It was weird. Now, it's like you've said, you went into this alternate reality and you saw buildings and figures and you assumed that they were humans and you assumed they were annoyed. It was like they were communicating with you saying, hey, I'm coming for you and I'm not happy about this because you felt that. And I felt the same when I saw that object with my mum. I'm telling you, I saw that object. It didn't look like my mum, but I assumed it was my mum. It was like it was kind of communicating. It was weird. And that was at the same time that my mum disappeared for 9 hours. Yeah, it's, I definitely think there's more to this, but I know Katz is he's gonna get his teeth into this, I'm sure.
The hairs on my arms are actually like thinking about it all. It's making me kind of have that memory of it. And I've never really gone in depth talking about it before, and it was just such a vivid thing. And like I said, I've sleepwalked before. I've had lucid dreams. But it's never felt like that. And there isn't a way that I can explain it other than I went somewhere else just for a little bit. Something happened, and I went somewhere else.
And it's interesting that that's how you feel. It's interesting that's your belief, that you believe this happened to you and you believe you went to a different dimension, let's say. And yeah, well, who am I to argue with that?
I don't know what it was or where I went, but something changed just for a little bit. I was in a different place with different feelings, different colors, almost like it was different physics to the world that I was in, because things just didn't quite seem right. And it freaked me out. I ran away. And I'm not ashamed to say that I ran away. I think most people would.
It's been a fascinating story, and especially from someone as logical and scientific and skeptical as yourself. Like I said at the beginning, for you to come on and still have all these years later that very vivid memory and almost confusion about, what the hell must that have been? is really intriguing to listen to, and I'm sure you've got some of your own ideas of what it may or may not have been. I'm going to go off back to the pit, call it, and see if I can come up with some of my own. Ranty, have you got any last questions you want to ask before we?
I don't think I've got any other questions to ask. I'm just happy that you decided to come on the show and tell your story, and yeah, I'm sure you won't get any backlash over this.
Thank you for having me on. It's awesome that there's a place where you can come and tell a story like this. And honestly, the podcast is fantastic, guys. I am loving every single second of it. Please don't stop doing it.
Oh, you're a legend, mate. Thank you so much. Now, me and Ranty are going to descend back into the pit to see what we make of your story. While we're doing that, I would urge anybody listening to check out the links in the description to find FTFT on YouTube, and he's well worth a subscription. But we've said goodbye to him now. And Ranty, I'm going to pass over to you. What did you make of that story?
Well, let me start by saying a massive thank you to FTFE for coming on the show. I know that this was a big risk for FTFE to come on this particular show and talk about the things that he's talked about here today, and to even express a belief that he, for a time at least, dipped into a parallel world. And the reason for that is obviously because of the content that he puts out on his channel and the type of subscriber that would subscribe to his channel. So he's definitely taken a risk, but I have to say, I think the risk was worth it because this story was exceptional. I really enjoyed it. So thank you, FTFE, for coming on and sharing that with us. Now then, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Right, we had the lights turning off in unison, and that would be creepy on any day, I think. I believe one time that happened to me, something similar, where the lights appeared to turn off as I'm walking down the road, you know, almost as I passed them, and that was kind of unnerving, I have to say. But yeah, in this particular case, what follows on from that, maybe an indication of something was going to happen. Maybe it wasn't, who knows. But one thing is for sure, that he definitely did appear to at least go somewhere different for a short time. And the fact that FTFE has remembered this for such a long time and is willing to come on this show and tell us about it, with all the negative connotations that may come along with that for his YouTube channel, that tells me that he has a strong belief that this is something that he needed to share with people. So I've got to take that into account. I've also got to take into account the world that he entered in and how it appeared that these people, he was getting this sense that they were people, and this sense that they were coming towards him, and this sense that they were angry. Now, this ties in a lot with some of the guests we've had on before, and some of the podcasts that we still have to release, actually, about people that have experienced something similar, or this kind of telepathic ability, this understanding of how you can communicate without actually having to see someone. And again, something happened to me as well, obviously, with my mum, when I saw that entity on the bus, one dressed in all black, that I assumed was my mother, even though it looked nothing like my mother. So I can understand that too. I can also understand this pastel-like drawing. I mean, maybe it was some kind of transition into a different realm that he wasn't fully in. You know, he could have been partially in, and that's why he was only partially able to see what he was able to see, which was a lot of things that were disjointed and pastel-y. I also like the idea that he went through this kind of wormhole, this kind of doorway, let's say, because it appears that as he entered into this, let's say, wormhole, the entrance to that had a different feel to it in a lot of ways. You know, I mean, it was more like things changed in that particular spot. And when he walked through that, he was able to think to himself, hey, I can feel these pins and needles. Hey, I can feel this pressure differential. And then when he passed through that, he then obviously saw what he saw. But when he returned back to that same spot, he got the same feeling again, like he was passing through some kind of doorway, and this doorway was having this effect on him. And also, yeah, and then there's another thing. He also went back and he told his mother. He told his mother that evening, and this story, to me, coming from FTFE anyway, at least, that's the biggest point. The biggest point is for me that the guest, because I know of the guest, I've seen his work, I've actually been on his show, so it's coming from him. You know, this means I'm going to have to say that I think something happened. And I know that, Cats, you're going to probably find something different, which is fine. You know, you're more than capable, I'm sure, of trying to find some kind of scientific explanation for this. But for me, you know, the more that these stories come out, the more that we're seeing this same kind of effect, this same kind of phenomena with the same sort of reasonable people coming on and telling us these things. It all leads to me just thinking to myself, well, there is definitely more to this. There's definitely more to this paranormal world that we all seem to live in. Over to you, Cats.
Well, I will have a go. Whether or not FTFE will accept my answer or not, I've absolutely no idea, because obviously it's definitely a tough one, especially not having been there and experienced it myself. But I do like the idea of parallel worlds in physics, but I haven't ever seen anything, and there might be much, much, much better physicists out there than me, of which there are many, who will disagree, but I've never seen anything that suggests it's possible for an entire body and its consciousness to go unharmed from one universe into one of these parallel universes and come back. I've seen theoretical physics talking about particles moving from one place to another, but whole bodies could be a different matter. So I'm not so sure that there is a parallel dimension or a parallel world explanation for this. What's definitely happened is he's definitely had some sort of physical effect. He's definitely felt unwell, and I am going to put this down to lack of sleep, but I'm not saying that he's sleepwalking, and I'm not saying that he's lucid dreaming or anything like that. But what I am saying is there is very, 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 very strong research that sleep deprivation when you're young, even as little as just one night's sleep deprivation, can be something which can trigger dissociative symptoms. Now, when I say dissociative symptoms, I'm not talking about being mentally unwell. I'm talking about symptoms that the majority of people will experience at some point in their life. Some people experience it episodically and it returns. Some people may just experience it once, but it's a perfectly normal and natural thing to experience. And when you're young, a lack of sleep, being very tired, is certainly a contributing factor to experiencing some of these symptoms. Now, the dissociative symptoms that I believe FTFE might have experienced are symptoms of depersonalization and derealization. Now, when somebody's showing derealization and depersonalization symptoms, it's almost as though they feel that they're looking at everything from a distance, almost like they're watching a movie. Everything seems very, very foggy and dreamlike around them. Time itself may feel like it's sped up or slowed down, so everything is unreal. Colours and objects may sort of blur into one, and it can actually be very, very difficult to recognise familiar objects and faces. So to cut a long story short, somebody who's experiencing these symptoms, even just episodically for a short amount of time, will have no sort of familiarity with the surroundings at all. Everything is going to feel alien. And one of the key things about these symptoms is they are hugely stressful to the individual who experiences them. They are massively stressful because it does feel as if you are placed into a different world, a different time. Maybe you're abducted by aliens or whatever. Everything lacks any sort of reasonable explanation, or so it seems. So to me, this has all the hallmarks of a lack of sleep-induced episode of derealization. But of course, who am I to say that? Because I wasn't there and I didn't experience it. And it was a great story, and I do just want to thank FTFE for coming on and sharing it. And again, all the links to his channels are in the description.
Well, obviously, you've heard my side of the story, you've heard FTFE's side of the story, and you've also heard Katz's scientific explanation as to what he thinks has happened. But obviously, that's down to you to decide. You've got an opinion, you've got a voice, and we would really love you to leave a comment so that you can tell us whether or not you believe myself, FTFE, whether you believe Katz, or whether you have a different explanation or a different viewpoint of your own. Leave us a comment, leave us a like, and if you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button because it really does help. We're trying to get to that 1,000 subscribers, and we really need every subscription that we can get right now.
Yes, we really, really would appreciate that. And also, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.